Welcome back to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. We're coming to you live from Inside ETFs in Hollywood, Florida. And joining us for this segment, we have John Jacobs. He's the chairman of the board at Alerian and a good old friend of Nasdaq. John, it's great to see you, as always, no matter where we are in the country, meeting up with each other, and lots of good content coming out of the conference this year. Yes. What are some of the core ETF industry issues that you're hearing about?
So, like, it's kicked off first thing this morning. Are we still in a race to zero? And as the fees continue to drop down, the massive regulatory year in 2019 was where the approval of the ETF rule and the non-transparent ETFs. What's going to happen there in the industry? So those are two big themes. You can't be at an ETF conference without people talking about fixed income, and is this the year the fixed income is going to happen, and the liquidity of the ETF versus the illiquidity of the online market, things like that. So I don't think there's too many super new issues. I think it's a continuation of other issues, but I do think that with the movement by the regulators to kind of clear the decks and kind of put some certainty around some of the rules and regs, I think we're going to start seeing some of these things start to happen one way or the other.
Yeah, I would say everyone I've spoken to, non-transparent, semi-transparent, the new ETF rule has been very well received by the industry, which is great for investors, allows new entrants for managers to come in. Industry at a broad level, what are some of the things you're hearing in terms of ETF outlook for 2020? Are we going to continue to see that growth that we saw in the decade prior?
I think so, but I think because there's still geographic expansion, right? So the U.S. and Europe, they're really far ahead, but other markets, and you just saw that the Singapore Stock Exchange just made an acquisition and so on. So I do think that there are other geographic expansions still available. I do think this story has still been 90% about equity ETFs. And as we talk about, there's other asset classes that still have room to grow. So if I were looking at a baseball game, I think that we're in the third inning still. I think it's early days, and I think we have a long runway. And I think 2020 is going to be a really pivotal year for the reasons you said, is that you're going to start to see these new products which can finally come to market and we'll start to see, do they gain traction with investors?
I'm also hearing a lot about active management outlook, and because we're seeing a little bit of volatility come back into the market, that they're more bullish on active managers this year versus just exclusive to indexing and passive, which has been a really big story in the ETF space. And one of the things you've spoken about, the hidden dangers of the great index fund takeover. Tell us more about that.
Sure. So it's interesting because I first ran across this problem many years ago when Apple took a huge run-up in price, and they ended up having a massive weight in QQQ and the Spider, and people who own those two indexes didn't realize how overweighted they were in the Apple stock. So flipping it to how it is today, the big three ETF firms control 22% of the S&P 500 in terms of votes because they buy them through their index funds, etc. And the big three together, for example, own 18% of Apple. Now, they own them because they're in indexes and they have to buy them. And they typically have not been very, shall we say, active as being investors. But there's no reason why. We see that BlackRock has made some conversations recently about being more proactive on ESG and things like that. So I do think that you're going to start to, it is a question that we all have to face in industry, the concentration of shares of big public companies by ETF issuers.
All right, and it's also when we're always telling investors, make sure you're diversified. And it's great if you have 5-6 funds, but if they all look the same under the hood, you're not diversified.
You're exactly right.
All right, John, great to see you as always. Thanks for joining us at Inside ETFs.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining me on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.